Marcus Hale was the kind of man who never looked for trouble, but trouble had a way of finding him anyway. He was 34 years old, broad-shouldered, with rough hands that told the story of a man who had worked hard every day of his adult life. He worked at a construction site on the east side of the city, pouring concrete and carrying steel, coming home every evening with dust on his boots and ache in his back. But none of that ever bothered him. What mattered to him more than anything else in the world was his 8-year-old daughter, Lily. Lily had her mother's eyes, wide, brown, and always curious about the world. Her mother, Diane, had passed away 2 years earlier from a sudden illness that gave no warning and no time for goodbyes. That loss had split Marcus's world in half. But he had picked up both pieces and kept walking, because Lily needed him to. She needed her father present, stable, and there. So he was. Every Saturday morning, Marcus took Lily to the same place, a small diner called the Golden Cup, tucked between a dry cleaner and a pharmacy on Redwood Street. It was nothing fancy. The floors were old tile, the booths were worn down at the edges, and the coffee came in thick ceramic mugs that had been washed 1,000 times. But the food was good and honest, and Lily loved the blueberry pancakes they served with real maple syrup. That was enough for Marcus. On this particular Saturday, the city outside was cold and gray, with a thin wind cutting through the streets. Marcus and Lily pushed through the diner's glass door just after 9 in the morning. The place was busier than usual. Holiday weekend crowds had spilled into every corner. They found a 2-person booth near the window and settled in. Lily immediately pressed her nose against the foggy glass and started drawing shapes with her finger. Marcus smiled and picked up the laminated menu, even though he already knew what they would order. Their waitress arrived a few minutes later. Her name tag said Claire. She was a woman in her late 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a low bun, and tired eyes that still managed to carry a trace of warmth. She moved carefully between the tables, balancing plates, refilling coffees, and offering small smiles to the customers she served. She had been working since the early morning, and it showed in the slight drag of her steps. But she was doing her job with quiet dignity, and Marcus noticed that. He ordered blueberry pancakes for Lily and eggs with toast for himself. Claire wrote it down neatly, nodded, and moved on to the next table. Then the trouble arrived. A group of 3 people came into the diner and took the large corner booth, 2 women and a man, all dressed in expensive weekend clothes. The man was loud from the moment he sat down. He had a sharp face, a pressed collar, and the kind of confidence that came not from achievement, but from never being told no. His name, as Marcus would later learn, was Gerald Stanton. He was a regional manager for some kind of retail chain. He liked letting people know that. When Claire came to take their order, Gerald barely looked up from his phone. He rattled off his order fast and careless, then added a long list of modifications. No butter, no this, extra that, the sauce on the side. Claire wrote everything down carefully. She asked him to repeat one part, because he had spoken too quickly and she wanted to get it right. Gerald looked up then. The look on his face was not kind. I said what I said, he told her. If you can't keep up, maybe you shouldn't be doing this job. One of the women with him gave a small, uncomfortable laugh. The other stared at the table. Claire did not respond. She simply nodded and moved away to place the order. Marcus had heard every word. He kept his face still and said nothing. He poured a little more syrup on Lily's pancakes when they arrived and listened to her talk about a drawing she had made at school. But his attention was split. He was watching the corner booth with quiet attention. The food came out. Gerald looked at his plate and immediately called Claire back over. He pointed at the dish and told her it was wrong. His tone was louder now, the kind of loud that is meant to be heard by other tables. He told her she hadn't listened, that the order was clearly too complicated for her, that he expected better from a place that called itself a restaurant. Claire stood there calmly. She apologized. She offered to fix it. Gerald waved a hand at her. Just take it back, and try to use your ears this time. The diner had gone slightly quieter. A few heads had turned. Claire picked up the plate without a word and walked back toward the kitchen. Her back was straight. Her steps were even. But Marcus saw her hands. They were shaking slightly as she held the plate. He had seen enough. Marcus set down his coffee mug. He looked at Lily, who was still drawing shapes on the window glass, blissfully unaware of the tension in the room. "Give me 1 second, sweetheart," he said gently. He slid out of the booth and walked across the diner to the corner table. Gerald was already on his phone again, speaking loudly into it about something that sounded like golf scores. Marcus stopped at the edge of the table and waited. Gerald did not look up. "Excuse me," Marcus said. His voice was calm and even. Gerald glanced up with the particular expression of someone who is annoyed at being interrupted. "What? I heard what you said to that waitress," Marcus told him. "I'd like you to talk to her differently when she comes back." Gerald stared at him for a moment. Then he let out a short, condescending laugh. "Who are you exactly?" "Someone sitting close enough to hear everything," Marcus said. He kept his voice low and level, without anger, without aggression, just plain and clear. "She asked you to repeat yourself because she was trying to do her job correctly. That's not a reason to speak to someone that way." Gerald's face shifted. He was the kind of man who was not used to being challenged in public, especially not by someone who looked like they had just come from a job site. He straightened up in his seat and gave Marcus a long, dismissive look up and down. "This is a private conversation," Gerald said. "Mind your own business." "When you do it loud enough for the whole diner to hear," Marcus replied, "it stops being private." The two women at the table were staring. A few nearby customers had turned to look. Gerald opened his mouth to say something sharp, but Marcus was already speaking again, still calm, still quiet. "She's working hard. She's been on her feet since early this morning, serving people who came here to have a decent meal. She doesn't deserve to be spoken to like she's beneath you. Nobody does." He paused for just a second. "That's all I wanted to say." He turned and walked back to his booth without waiting for a response. Lily had turned away from the window and was watching him with wide eyes. "Daddy, what happened?" "Nothing bad," he told her. "Just a conversation." She studied his face for a moment the way children do when they are deciding whether to believe something. Then she nodded and went back to her pancakes. Claire came back out from the kitchen a few minutes later with a corrected plate. She approached Gerald's table with the same quiet composure as before. Gerald said nothing to her this time. He took the plate and looked away. The loudness had gone out of him, at least for now. As Claire passed by Marcus's table on her way back, she paused. She looked at him with an expression that was hard to read. Something between surprise and gratitude and a tiredness that ran deeper than one morning's shift. "Thank you," she said. Just those two words, spoken softly. Marcus nodded once. "You didn't deserve that." She moved on. Marcus finished his coffee. Lily ate the last of her pancakes and asked if they could walk past the bookstore on the way home. He said yes. He paid the bill, left a generous tip, and helped Lily into her coat. He had no idea that the woman he had just defended was not simply a tired waitress working a Saturday shift. He had no idea that her presence in that diner, in that uniform, on that particular morning, was something far more deliberate than it appeared. And he had absolutely no idea that in defending her, he had just set something into motion that would change both their lives entirely. The woman who called herself Claire in that diner had another name entirely. Her real name was Eleanor Voss. And Eleanor Voss was not a waitress. She was the founder and chief executive officer of Voss Group International, a company that managed a portfolio of hospitality businesses across 14 states, restaurants, hotel chains, catering companies, and a growing chain of upscale diners that had been expanding steadily for the past 6 years. The company employed over 4,000 people. Eleanor had built it from a single coffee shop she had opened at 26 years old with borrowed money and no safety net. She had worked every position in that shop herself, cashier, barista, cleaner, manager, before she understood well enough how to grow it into something larger. That instinct, the one that kept her close to the ground level of her own business, had never left her. Once a quarter, Eleanor chose one of her locations and spent a Saturday morning working it undercover. She did not announce it. She did not prepare anyone for it. She simply showed up, put on a uniform, and worked a shift the way any ordinary employee would. She took orders, carried plates, dealt with difficult customers, and watched how everything operated when no one knew the boss was in the room. It was the most honest data she ever collected. Managers could polish a report. Customers could be coached. But a random Saturday morning with no warning, that told her everything. The Golden Cup on Redwood Street was a recently acquired location. The previous owner had sold it 8 months ago, and Eleanor had taken it into the Voss Group portfolio as a test case for her mid-range diner expansion project. She had been receiving mixed feedback from the regional team about the customer service culture at this location. Some reports said the staff was excellent. Others flagged tension between management and floor employees. She wanted to see it for herself. What she had not planned for was Gerald Stanton. Gerald was, as it happened, not just a random customer. He was a mid-level business contact who had briefly been considered for a vendor partnership with one of Eleanor's retail-adjacent subsidiaries. The meeting had never gone further than an initial proposal. Eleanor had reviewed his file once, decided the partnership was not worth pursuing, and moved on. She doubted he had any idea who she was, and there was no reason he should. Her face was not widely known in public. She gave very few interviews, avoided social media almost entirely, and had spent years deliberately keeping a low profile outside of business circles. That anonymity was a tool she valued. When Gerald had spoken to her at that table, looked right through her as though she were a fixture in the room, as though her question was an inconvenience and her presence was barely worth acknowledging. She had felt something she had not felt in a long time. Not anger exactly. Something older than that. Something she remembered from the early years, when she had actually been the waitress, when people had spoken to her that way and she had swallowed it because she had no choice, because the rent was due and the shift wasn't over. She had handled it the way she had trained herself to handle it. Calmly, professionally, without reaction. She had gone back to the kitchen, corrected the order, taken a slow breath, and returned to the floor. And then she had watched Marcus Hale stand up. She had noticed him earlier, when he came in with his daughter. There was something about the way he helped the little girl out of her coat and folded it carefully before laying it on the seat beside her. Small gesture, but Eleanor was trained to notice small things. She had noticed the way he ordered, clearly, politely, with a thank you at the end that was genuine rather than automatic. She had noticed him watching the corner booth after Gerald's first sharp remark. She had seen something shift in his expression. Not rage. Something more measured than that. When he stood up and walked over to Gerald's table, she had been watching from near the kitchen pass. She had stayed still and let it happen. She did not need saving. She was quite capable of handling Gerald Stanton in ways he could not yet imagine. But she did not stop Marcus either, because what he was doing was not rescue. It was something simpler and more rare than that. He was holding a line. He was saying plainly, to a man who expected no one to push back, that the way he had spoken was not acceptable. And he had done it without drama, without performance, without making it about himself. Eleanor had worked with executives for 20 years. She had sat in rooms full of powerful, educated, articulate people. She could count on one hand the ones who would have done what Marcus Hale did that morning. She thought about him through the rest of her shift. She thought about the way his daughter had looked at him when he came back to the table. She thought about the tip he left, not extravagant, but generous in a way that felt considered rather than showy. She thought about the quiet 2 words she had said to him and the quiet 2 words he had said back. After her shift ended, she changed out of the uniform in the small back office, put on her own clothes, and drove back to her apartment on the north side of the city. She sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee and opened her laptop. Then she paused. She closed the laptop again. She had a research team. She had access to more databases and professional networks than most people could imagine. But she sat there for a long time before she decided to use any of it. She was not sure what she was doing exactly, or what she expected to find, or what she planned to do with whatever she found. She told herself she was simply curious. She told herself it was the same instinct that made her walk the floor of her own diners undercover, a desire to understand what was real beneath the surface. She made a few careful inquiries through her assistant the following Monday. She kept the request specific and narrow. She wanted to know who the man was. That was all. It did not take long to find him. Marcus Hale, 34, single father, construction worker. His wife had passed away 2 years prior. He had no criminal record, no significant debt, no social media presence beyond an old account he had not updated in years. He lived in a rented apartment in the Millfield neighborhood, a working-class part of the city about 20 minutes from Redwood Street. He paid his bills on time. His daughter was enrolled at Millfield Primary School, where her teachers, according to community records Eleanor's team was able to access through local school partnership databases, described her as bright and well-adjusted. There was nothing remarkable about Marcus Hale on paper. He was an ordinary man. He worked hard, took care of his child, and went to a diner on Saturday mornings. That was the whole picture, as far as the data was concerned. But Eleanor had seen him in person, and she knew that the data was only ever part of the picture. She found out, through a separate thread of research, Something else about Marcus that was not in any database. His construction company, a mid-sized firm he worked for called Halcyon Build, had recently lost a significant contract. The layoffs were expected to hit the crew level in the coming weeks. Marcus would almost certainly be among those affected. He had no savings large enough to carry him for long. The apartment lease was up for renewal in 3 months. The picture, when she added those details, looked more difficult than it had appeared at first. Eleanor sat with this information for a day. She did not rush. She was not a person who rushed. She thought about the line between help and interference, between recognizing something real in a person and projecting something onto them that she wanted to be there. She had made that mistake before in business, and she had learned from it. What she decided, in the end, was modest. She would create a professional opportunity and let him respond to it on his own terms. She would not manufacture anything false. The Voss Group had a facilities and construction management division that was legitimately expanding. There was a real position being created for a field operations supervisor, someone with ground-level construction experience who could oversee renovation work at several of their new diner locations across the city. It was a salaried role. It came with stability and benefits. It was a real job, and it needed a real person with real skills. She had her HR director prepare the listing. She asked that it be posted through 2 standard job platforms and also through the Community Employment Board in the Millfield area. She did not put Marcus's name on anything. She did not reach out to him directly. She simply put the door in his path and waited to see if he would find it. What Eleanor Voss did not plan for, and what she would not fully understand until later, was that Marcus Hale was not the only one who had been changed by that Saturday morning at the Golden Cup. She had spent years behind glass, behind titles, behind the quiet distance of authority. In the 20 minutes she had watched him sit with his daughter and then stand up for a stranger, something in her had shifted. She did not have a word for it yet, but it was there, real and quiet, the way most important things are, before they become impossible to ignore. Marcus found out about the layoffs on a Tuesday afternoon. His site manager, a quiet man named Ron who had always been straight with his crew, gathered them in a circle near the equipment shed after lunch and told them plainly. The main contract had fallen through. Work would dry up by the end of the month. He was sorry. He meant it, and they all knew it, but sorry didn't change anything. Marcus drove home that evening in silence. Lily was at her after-school program until 5, which gave him an hour alone in the apartment. He sat at the kitchen table and looked at the numbers he already knew by heart. Rent, groceries, utilities, Lily's school supplies, the small medical bill still sitting in the drawer. He had enough to carry them through 6, maybe 7 weeks if he was careful. After that, the picture got harder. He was not the kind of man who panicked. He had learned, in the years since Diane passed, that panic was a luxury he could not afford. But he was also honest with himself about the weight of things. This was a real problem, and it needed a real solution, and he would find one. He just didn't know yet where to look. He started checking job listings that evening after Lily went to bed. He used the Community Employment Board online, one he had bookmarked years ago and used once before when he was between contracts. Most of what came up was outside his range of experience or required licenses he didn't hold. He scrolled through the pages steadily, marking a few possibilities, dismissing others. Then one listing stopped him. It was posted under the category of facilities and construction management. The position was for a field operations supervisor at a hospitality company, overseeing renovation and maintenance work at a group of diner and restaurant locations across the city. The description called for hands-on construction experience, the ability to manage small crews, knowledge of building systems, and a reliable and detail-oriented approach to physical site work. It was salaried. It included health benefits. It listed a start date of the following month. Marcus read it twice. Then he read it a third time. It fit him closely enough that he sat back and looked at the ceiling for a moment, almost suspicious of it. Jobs that matched well were not something he was used to finding quickly. But he checked himself. He was not going to talk himself out of applying for something real, because it seemed almost too real. He updated his resume that same night, wrote a cover letter that was plain and specific and honest, and submitted the application before he went to sleep. He heard back within 4 days. A woman named Sandra from the Human Resources Department at Voss Group International called to schedule an interview. Marcus wrote down the address, thanked her, and spent the weekend preparing as carefully as he knew how, reviewing what he knew about building systems, thinking through examples from past jobs, pressing his best shirt. The interview was held at the company's city office, a clean and modern space on the 14th floor of a building on the west side. Sandra met him at reception and walked him to a conference room. Two people interviewed him, Sandra and a man named David who ran the facilities division. They asked him practical questions about how he managed timelines, how he handled problems on site, how he communicated with contractors and vendors. Marcus answered everything directly. He did not oversell himself. He said what he knew, admitted what he didn't, and explained how he typically learned what he needed to learn. The interview lasted 40 minutes. He left feeling like he had represented himself honestly, which was all he could do. He was offered the position 11 days later. The salary was more than he had earned before. He accepted the same afternoon. He had been in the role for 3 weeks when he met Eleanor Voss. It happened during a scheduled walkthrough of one of the new diner locations, a property on Redwood Street that was being renovated. Marcus had already been to the space twice, reviewing the scope of work with the contractors. On this particular morning, he was there to go over the updated electrical plan with the project foreman when a woman walked in through the front entrance. He recognized her before she had taken 5 steps inside. It was the waitress from the Golden Cup. The woman whose hands had shaken slightly as she carried that plate away from Gerald Stanton's table. The woman who had said thank you to him in 2 quiet words. She was dressed entirely differently now. A dark-fitted jacket, straight-cut trousers, low heels, her dark hair down and professional. But her face was the same, and Marcus had a sharp memory for faces. She was with 2 other people, a man and a woman who moved around her with the particular attentiveness of people who work for someone important. She was pointing at the ceiling, asking a question about the structural beam clearance. The project foreman was answering her carefully, the way people answer carefully when they are aware that someone with authority is in the room. Marcus stood still for a moment. Then he continued looking at the electrical plan in his hands, waiting to see what would happen. She noticed him after a few minutes. He saw the moment she recognized him. Something in her expression changed, a small, careful shift. She excused herself from the conversation she was in and crossed the room to where he was standing. "You're the new field supervisor," she said. "Yes," he said. "Marcus Hale." "Eleanor Voss," she said. "I own this company." He looked at her steadily. He was putting things together. He was a methodical thinker, and things were connecting fast. The diner, the uniform, the Saturday shift, the job posting that had appeared on the community board in his neighborhood, matched with precision to his exact skills at exactly the right moment. "You were working that Saturday," he said. "At the Golden Cup." "I was," she said. She did not offer anything beyond that. She was watching him the way she watched everything, directly, without flinching. "Were you working undercover?" he asked. "I visit my locations without announcing myself," she said. "It helps me understand what's actually happening." He nodded slowly. He looked down at the electrical plan and then back up at her. "And the job, did you create it because of that morning?" Eleanor had prepared for this question. She had known, once he came through the interview process and proved himself qualified, that this moment would eventually arrive. She had decided already that she would not lie to him. She had a strong personal intolerance for dishonesty, and she was not going to start practicing it now. "The position was real," she said. "The need was real. You were genuinely qualified. I did not invent any of that." She paused. "But I made sure the listing appeared where you would find it." "Yes." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. The foreman was talking to someone across the room. Somewhere outside, a delivery truck was backing up with a low beeping sound. "I would have liked to know that," he said. His voice was not angry. It was measured, the same way it had been in the diner. "I know," Eleanor said. "I made a choice I wasn't entirely sure about. I still don't know if it was the right one." He looked at her carefully. "What I did that morning, that wasn't something I did to get anything. I wasn't looking for a reward." "I know that," she said. "That's why I noticed it." He was still for another moment. Then something in his posture settled. Not softened exactly, but settled. He folded the electrical plan in his hands once, along the crease. "I like this job," he said. "I'm good at it." "I know," she said again. "I've read your first 3 reports. You're very good at it." There was a pause that was not uncomfortable. Outside, the city moved past the empty window frames of the unfinished diner. "Then I'd like to keep it," he said, "on the basis that it's real work and I'm earning it." "That's the only basis it was ever offered on," Eleanor said. He nodded once. She nodded back. There was an understanding between them, clean and plain, the way honest things tend to be when the people involved are not afraid of them. Over the months that followed, Marcus built a reputation within the Voss group that needed no backstory to support it. He was reliable in a way that people around him came to depend on. He solved problems without drama. He communicated clearly, followed through on every commitment, and treated the workers under him the same way he had treated Claire when she was carrying a plate across a diner floor, with the basic dignity that every working person deserved. Word moved up through the company the way real things always move. Quietly, steadily, without needing to be announced. Eleanor did not make it known to anyone what had happened between them. She didn't need to. She watched from the appropriate distance of a CEO, observing someone who had earned their place without her hand holding them there. She had a particular satisfaction in that, the kind that came not from charity but from being right about someone. Lily turned 9 that spring. Marcus took her to the Golden Cup for blueberry pancakes on her birthday morning. He chose the same booth near the window. He let her draw on the glass while they waited. He left a good tip and said thank you when the plates arrived. He was still the same man who had walked in there on a cold gray Saturday and done the simple, unremarkable, quietly important thing of telling another person that they mattered. He had not done it for anything. He had done it because it was right, and because he was the kind of man who still believed that doing right had value even when no one was keeping score. He never could have known that someone was watching. And the remarkable thing, the thing that made the whole story worth telling, was that it would not have changed anything if he had.